Today, let's start a conversation about what it could be like to live in the world post-Roe.
Welcome to Coffee with Creamer, where you get to sit down with our host, Dr. Barry Creamer, for a conversation about faith, life, and culture. We'll look at old ideas through a new lens, turn those culture wars on their head, and paint a picture of the way things could be. If you like your thinking deep and your coffee hot, pull up a chair. You're in the right place.
I'm sure you're aware of the leaked draft indicating the Supreme Court is likely to overthrow Roe v. Wade, and also Casey, both of those key decisions from 1973 and 1992, ensconcing in American law and culture, unfortunately, the normalcy of abortion, that is, the right to an abortion in some ways. And so in light of that leaked brief where Roe might be overturned, there's something really serious for us to consider about a different way to approach the future. And for some people who are pro-life, as I am, for some people that means going one direction, and it's sort of further in the same direction we've been going. Oddly, surprisingly, you would think, well, it can't be that. It's going to be the opposite because Roe's been overturned. But actually, it is just going exactly the same direction we've been going all along. And the other option is obviously to turn around and go a completely different direction, which will be a huge challenge for us because the temptation, the automatic or natural response for us in this moment where Roe v. Wade will likely be overturned as I'm recording this, as you're listening to it, it may have already come out. The ruling may have come out, and it may come out surprisingly in a way we don't expect. But again, we don't expect that. We expect it to be overturned. That when it is overturned, the world being different doesn't mean that we will automatically be different. In fact, the natural inclination we're going to have is to be the same as we've always been. And I want us to do something different from that. And Christianity invites us to do something different from that. And so what I want to do is take, I don't know how many episodes this will take, but let's suppose a couple or maybe 3 episodes to go through this, maybe not. I want to consider the options that are before us first to sort of clarify why I'm saying we need to go a different direction than we would automatically go when Roe is overturned. Because if we go the direction we would automatically, it will be the same direction that we're going right now. And that direction is not good. I will explain what I mean by that in just a moment, because that's the opening part of the conversation that we need to have. But then I also want us to see why it's so important to change that direction, because the force of law that has been going one direction for so long and might change with this ruling that's going to be handed down isn't satisfactory. It's not enough to get where we really want to be. And then I also want us to talk about long-term the values that we actually hold. And if you say, well, the value I hold is pro-life, well, that's true in one sense, but it also misses a big part of the conversation about the core values, not just light or, corollary values that go with life, but I mean core values, underlying values that make us pro-life and that cause us to care about policies the way we do. And then once we grasp that, it's an opportunity to hear what people on the other side of this issue actually do think, instead of the way we've caricatured them and sort of limited them in our understanding of them. And by doing that, be able to rethink our relationship with them and draw a different conclusion to the whole matter. So you can see, just talking through the different aspects of this conversation takes a moment in itself. But introducing the topic is this simple. There are a couple of options in front of us. And I'm almost 60 years old, and the issue itself is right at 50 years old. And we have had, in this time, we've had 50 million abortions, plus there are more than that, but at least 50 million abortions that have happened, which I would refer to this way as 50 million times that people have considered no life at all to be a better option than a child from an unplanned or perhaps complicated pregnancy. Just that statement should give gravity to the conversation we're going to have, because it's not that we have a bloodthirsty culture. And I know you can say, well, that's what you just said is proof that what you just now said is false. The 50 million times that decision has been made, but it becomes really important to grasp some of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes. When evil looks like us, for instance, that our thinking that people have to be monsters to have a different opinion or to do the things that we find unacceptable, our opinion that they have to turn into monsters to do that is dismissing the nature that we have and that we share with those very same people. And by doing that, we lose our ability to have an influence on them, but also an influence on the society as a whole. And I just don't want us to do that. And so in this culture where we've had 50 million times that this decision has not just been made, but followed up on, acted on, it has become something normal in our society. And the overturn of Roe brings this possibility for a true transformation in the culture, right, into light as an option. The thing is, none of us can foresee what that's going to mean. There are things for us to remember, for instance, and we'll talk more about these later on in the conversation, that overturning Roe doesn't suddenly make abortion illegal. It's not like suddenly no one's going to be able to get an abortion. It will return that decision to the states, and in many states, it will mean that abortion immediately becomes illegal in some way or another, which I'm thankful for. I think there should be a law, and I'm glad that those lives will be protected. So don't misunderstand anything I'm saying along the lines of undermining the nature of law to protect human life. I'm all in favor of that. But what this doesn't reveal for us, the fact that Roe is likely to be overturned based on this draft, but in a post-Roe world, it doesn't reveal for us what that world will look like. And even in the months and years that follow this decision to overturn Roe, we don't know how that's going to unfold. And so I'm not having this conversation as a prophet, and I mean by that the sort of traditional and naive way that we use the word prophet as a future teller. So a fortune teller kind of thing. I'm not doing that. I am describing for you the best that I can understand where our world is based on human nature and just how we interact with each other and how our society is formed, and on my understanding of cultural history, which is not all-encompassing, but is not ill-informed either. And so looking at those things, I think there is a way for us to understand at least some of the pressures that are going to be present moving forward and come to a better understanding of how we should respond in light of this overturning of such an established policy in American culture, Roe v. Wade. And so the two options that we have before us are, on one side, to reinforce the way we already are. Now, I know what you're thinking is only about the issue itself, Roe v. Wade. And so you're saying, well, obviously, we're not going to do that. I mean, we're overturning Roe, and so we're clearly not going to be like we were before. But Roe is not the only thing that exists in our culture that's part of this picture. And so overturning Roe doesn't eliminate this enormous wall that exists between the two sides of our culture on the issue of life. So there are a huge number of people in our society who are pro-choice. There are, I know how we'd like to characterize our culture. Well, they're not really pro-choice. Those are just misleading surveys and stuff like that. I've taught bioethics for years. I've been in the society dealing with this issue for years, and there is a huge part of our population that really is pro-choice, not necessarily pro-abortion. Some are that. But pro-choice is a huge portion of our society, just like that there is an enormous segment of our society that's pro-life. Those sides to this society exist on those sides partially because of the barrier we've constructed between the two sides. And the nation's established policy for the last 5 decades, including Roe v. Wade, and Casey, the decision about Casey versus Planned Parenthood that reinforced the ruling in Roe. It sort of adjusted it, but reinforced it also. That public policy, the established policy, has actually been in favor of the other side of that wall for the last 50 years. And so, and by the way, during that time, at the same time, while the nation's law protected abortion as a right, at the same time, local laws and regulations and state laws and regulations were bouncing back and forth from one side to the other, depending on what administration was in office and what was happening in the courts at the moment. So let me just explain what I mean by that, because this is part of the picture of understanding how entrenched in society's normalcy, not just abortion, but the wars surrounding abortion have become. This is part and parcel of how we exist as a society. I'm not prescribing or predicting that we have to stay in that war. I am predicting that if we don't do something deliberately to stop the war, or at least to pull back from the war, we will continue in it no matter what. And so I'm acknowledging up front that the first option we have is just to continue down that road. So we win Roe v. Wade, that one national policy comes to our side of the wall. Now you can see the Supreme Court has ruled with us and we're pro-life, so we're going to crush you people on the other side. We're going to start lobbing over these weapons of mass destruction to your side, and we're going to win this war finally. And we just continue down the road of having this conflict. The fact that the policies were bouncing back and forth even while Roe was encamped on the other side of that wall that I'm describing right now is apparent. If you just go back and look at the news stories from the past 50 years, from the past 40 years at least, when the culture war was really getting into its full head of steam, the way it would work is if you had a federal administration, so the Reagan administration, the George H.W. Bush administration, that was pro-life, adamantly pro-life, then you would have state regulations and local regulations that were very friendly to the idea of abortion, to providing for Planned Parenthood everything they could. And you would have even Congresses that were passing laws and making decisions that were based on the idea of making abortion more available because of the restrictions that were coming from executive orders and from the bully pulpit of the presidency and so on like that. And it's just, this is what happened. I've paid attention to it from the very beginning because I cared about it from the very beginning. And the same would happen when you got to a Clinton administration. And so you revoked the Mexico City policy, and suddenly pro-life activism is on the upswing, and there are more people out in the streets protesting against abortion, and state laws start to be formed to make it more difficult to get an abortion, or passed in order to make it more difficult to get an abortion, and so on. So you would have these swings because in the culture, if you're living in Texas and you're pro-choice and there's a Reagan administration, then you're saying to yourself, well, then I'm going to work in the state legislature and see what I can get done to make sure that I protect the right of a woman to have an abortion, and vice versa. When the Clintons went into office, when Bill Clinton became the president, then suddenly if you're pro-life in the state of Texas, then you're saying, well, if we're going to have a pro-choice president, then I'm going to be working in the state legislature to see what I can do to stop these abortions from happening, and so on. And look, I mean, that's just part of the nature of the society, part of the nature of the culture, that we were doing it that way. And by the way, it's the same way with court rulings or administrations and activism. When the administration and the support of the structures, the power that's in society, was in favor of abortion, then activism on the pro-life side was on the pro-life side, and fundraising were on the upswing. And vice versa. When there was a pro-life administration, then activism and fundraising on the pro-choice side was on the upswing. It's not complicated. It's easy to understand because people are suddenly up in arms and trying to protect the thing that they think is important and is not being protected by the powers that be. That's how society has been working, and it has become a structure, a system within which we work. That it's the same way bureaucracies work. And by the way, there is an overlap here between bureaucracies and systems. When you create an administration, so let's say you create a pro-life organization, and you start raising funds under the Clinton administration, then you need to keep raising money, and you need to keep your base stirred up. So if you elect a pro-life president, George W. Bush, when he was elected, then all of a sudden your money starts drying up because people say, well, we won the election and we have a president who's supportive of our cause. So why do I need to send you money? So you find causes to put into your bulletins and your brochures to send out and say, but it's not over. The battle is still real. We need to raise your money. And part of the reason you need to raise the money is because you know the battle's not over and you care about the issue. I'm not asserting that there's insincerity here. Every organization, every cause has its hypocrites. I'm not saying there's not insincerity either, but there are plenty of people who are very sincere on both sides of this cause, and especially this cause, plenty of sincerity present. So people who are very sincere do look at it and say, the battle's not over. We still do need to do this. So we need to stir up our base and get them to send us more money. So you create more brochures. But part of the motivation for that is you have a staff of 25 people and you need to pay them. And you don't want the staff to have to go get other jobs and then lose the administration you created or lose the ministry you created and even lose your own job. And so there is a reason for why practices that have gained traction over the last 50 years in this culture war have become ensconced in the society as systems and structures and bureaucracies that are not automatically going to go away because Roe v. Wade is overturned. That's just not what's going to happen. And so one of our options is that we just accept that reality. We don't think hard about how it could be completely different in the society. And I'm not saying by that we're not thoughtful people or not considerate people, but I'm saying to make a change, you really have to be deliberate about it. Otherwise, you're always going to have the same argument like you do with your teenager every morning. You're going to do the same thing in the way we function in society unless we deliberately decide to change. And so the one option we have in front of us is that we just continue to see the other side as the enemy. We continue to see that giant wall between us. And we say, well, the wall is still there, but we're just going to make sure that everybody on the other side of the wall is dead or uninfluential. We're going to make sure they're gone. And we're going to win the whole thing. And maybe we're going to move the wall over so it's way over there and there's no room for those people in our society anymore. And so we're going to win and win with absolute confidence. There's that option. We view those on the other side as a force to be defeated. That's the option that just continues down the road where we're trying to go right now. It's what we've been doing the whole time. And we just say, well, now we've got Roe on our side, or the overthrow of Roe on our side. So now we're going to just work harder to defeat those people. And we literally in that opportunity become history's cliched oppressed turned oppressor. That's the story of history. The oppressed become the oppressors. I mean, it's the French Revolution over and over and over again. If your class has been oppressed, then what do? Well, you overthrow those who were oppressing you. But what do you do with those people? You oppress them. So you don't take the king and shake hands with him and say, hey, we're all even now. Come be part of the bourgeoisie. You come on down here. You can be part of the proletariat. It'll all be good, King Louis XVI. It's all fine. No, we're going to cut your head off. You cut our heads off, we're going to cut your head off. The oppressed become the oppressors. That's what we do. Well, right now, there's a lot of that going on in the rhetoric about this transformation regarding Roe because we have the option to exercise a little power right now. We won this court ruling. We've got a conservative court. Let's go get it all, And we view the other side as an enemy still to be defeated. That's an option. I understand why it's there. I understand why the issues are important enough to make us feel that way. The other option, the one that is really hard for us to consider legitimate because we've built the wall for so long, is instead of building the wall, building a bridge. on this. And the reason we're able to do it right now is because we have a respite where life is safe for a moment. With Roe's overturn, and I'm not saying it's done. Believe me, I'm the one who's shouting from the other side, is not gone because of this. But with the court saying you don't have a guaranteed right to abortion, we have this respite where we have the opportunity to provide a more value-based place, refuge, sustainable place of safety and refuge for prenatal life, for human life. The way we are right now, the value and protection that we're able to afford human life is as precariously balanced as each legislative cycle or judicial ruling. We don't know what's going to happen from day to day, and those vagaries translate to the insecurity that's given to human life in a given year or moment. And what I'm advocating for is that instead of just saying, well, we won the battle this time, and who knows how long until another court rules the other way. Well, a court doesn't have to rule the other way for abortion to be protected again. Every voting cycle is going to be the option for the overthrow of all the gain we think we got from this one court ruling. And I'm just saying, I wish we would see in ourselves, not just the whole culture, but ourselves, those who are pro-life. I wish we would see in ourselves the opportunity this affords us to create a more sustainable, value-based refuge for those lives that we really want to protect. And so in order to get to that point, what we need to do is understand something beyond the force of law as a source for providing that protection for life. I'm not saying that the law shouldn't also protect life. It absolutely should. But one of the ways I understand the phrase, the thin blue line, by the way, this is, in a parallel, just as a metaphor, an analogy. The thin blue line is that nobody thinks there are enough police or even enough military to stop a mass decision to start living by violence. If everybody went berserk, if everybody decided to live by the rule of force, there wouldn't be enough police to stop the murders. There wouldn't be enough military to stop the violence that would be taking place. And all you have to do is look back to a few chaotic times, even in American history, to recognize that that's the case. But thank heavens for that thin blue line. We want a blue line where some individual decides, I'm taking the law into my own hands, I'm taking power into my own hands. We want that thin blue line to go over there and put up a wall, and it's dangerous for them, and we're grateful for their willingness to do that, to go up and put up a wall and say, no, you can't have access to the rest of society because they have decided to respect one another, to regard one another's liberties. And we use enough force to keep those fringe elements from trying to inflict only force as the rule of our society. It's what when I served on a jury recently, it's what the judge centered on when he was thanking the jurists for being the jurors for being willing to serve. He was saying this is what keeps us from being a society where just the bullies rule. The fact that we're willing to come into a court of law and someone pass a verdict and then we abide by the verdict. Even the fact that we all acknowledge that we're going to abide by the verdict is critical to having a society that's not just filled with bloodthirsty bullies. So I'm grateful for that thin blue line. And in the same way, I'm saying here, we have to figure out that the use of the force of law cannot be the only protection we have in place for the value of human life in our society. If that's all it is, then there's no real protection at all beyond our momentary, respites in the violence. And so what I want us to recognize is that with Roe's overturn, what we're thinking is this. And believe me, I've heard individuals say this already. So in World War II, this happened. In World War II, when there was a victory in Germany early on, there was a break in the German line. There was an opportunity early in the invasion of Europe. It's not early in the war itself, but early in the invasion of Europe. There was an opportunity in that break in the line to make a sudden rush for Berlin. And some people second guess, the way things went, and I don't blame them. I think they have good reason for it. But I mean, who can, Monday morning quarterbacking, right? Anybody can do it. But some people look at World War II and they say, hey, if we had done that, we would have saved thousands of Allied force lives, because we really did have an open path to rush in and go to Berlin and win the war and so on like that. Maybe so, maybe no. I mean, people are always going to dispute it historically and not know. But what we decided to do instead was to continue the pressure all along the front so that we could guarantee, rather than take an enormous risk, so that we could guarantee that we were going to make progress on it. Now, I don't care which way would have worked and wouldn't have worked. It's just an analogy to clarify what this picture is that I'm describing. Right now, people are seeing this overthrow of Roe v. Wade as a complete break in the enemy's front line. By seeing the other side as the enemy, we have this model in our minds. So they have a break in their line. Let's charge through and get every possible decision we can passed while we can. Let's go crush the enemy in this moment. So we break through, spread out behind the lines, and win every possible battle we can win. And I've already heard people creating legal arguments for overthrowing everything else that they can in this moment. Not even just saying, while we have a court that's friendly to human life, let's make all the decisions we can that are going to protect human life. Not that. But instead, let's overthrow Obergefell. Let's overthrow judgments that were made in the past that have nothing to do with the sanctity of human life, at least not directly. The very things, by the way, that Justice Scalia actually mentions in the leaked brief that he says wouldn't fall as a result of this ruling, which people on the other side don't necessarily believe what he's saying about that. Based on the actual or literal judgment that he's passing, maybe so. But in terms of the rationale for his judgments, that the bench shouldn't legislate and so on, maybe they would fall. I don't know. But the point is that the very things that he said we shouldn't worry about, that's what that's what a lot of people on the conservative side are saying we ought to go make a rush for. Let's get Obergefell overturned now, and let's get rulings. And some people are even the ruling that he brought up about contraceptives. And I mean, think about where our society is right now. Think about what it would mean for there to be a judicial overturn at the Supreme Court level of the protection of privacy for individual couples to use contraceptives in their marriage. Think about what that would mean. So that is part of the history of the judgments that led up to Roe, if you're not aware of it. So regardless of what it is, regardless of what you think about those, the idea is we've won this battle. Let's go win the war. Let's slaughter the enemy. Let's have a complete and total overthrow of where the society's been going for the last 50 years. And it's not 50, it's actually 150 years, but that's a different story we talked about before. So I felt, in 1992, when Casey was being adjudicated at the Supreme Court level, and this is a ruling in Pennsylvania between Casey and Planned Parenthood. And everybody thought, because we had a conservative court at the time, and the way that ruling looked like it was going to come down, Roe v. Wade was going to fall. And we were so optimistic that and then the ruling came down, and it actually reinforced Roe. It sort of changed the basis of the judgment and expanded the significance of the ruling of Roe. It was just crushing to those of us who were on the pro-life side. I mean, we were devastated. And what it really crushed in me was any confidence that the court would ever change the culture's tolerance or promotion of abortion. In other words, in that moment, I realized that the courts were not making the nation go where it went on abortion. The courts, and I would say it this way, Roe, the judgment in 1973, and Casey in 1992, it followed our nation's path. It didn't create the nation's path. And yet what we're hoping right now as pro-life people is that somehow the overthrow of Roe will create a different path for our nation. That's what we're hoping. I'm making the point that that's not how our society has ever worked, And I don't see it being how our society is going to work right now. Now, I get there's an argument to be had there. I'm not saying I'm 100% right and there's no way anybody could have a different perspective. There are other perspectives that are reasonable. I get it. Brown v. Board of Education type rulings could make you say, no, the court can lead in this. The court can guide in this, which creates an odd contradiction within the pro-life movement about what they think the courts ought to be doing and what we want the courts to be doing. But that's a matter for another discussion as well. All of that said, I'm simply pointing out that I was wrong about the court. I think it's going to come out this way because of the likelihood that Roe will be overturned. I was wrong about thinking that the court would never come to overturn Roe v. Wade. And I'm delighted that I was wrong. I'm glad the court will come to a different conclusion. I'm glad Roe will be overturned for every reason. I'm glad. But I don't think I'm wrong about the culture, where our culture is, or our culture's toleration of abortion. Those people still exist. And even going back historically and thinking about it, in the year that Roe was decided, it's not as if, oh, well, now the court's made this decision, so it's a matter of the pro-choice side persuading people that abortion actually is a good idea. No. The year that Roe was decided, 750,000 people through the rest of that year got an abortion. Didn't even just think about it, acted on it, and went and got an abortion. Roe was not deciding that the nation would be pro-abortion. Roe was making it so that the people who were already in our society and were pro-abortion could go and do what they already wanted to do. So I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's what happened. Roe was following the nation, not leading the nation into where it was going to be. And so, in that context, what I'm saying to you is, as a realist, and I'm not saying this as an idealist, I would make this same case as an idealist. And I mean by that, as a believer, I am compelled by all of my study in Scripture to acknowledge that Jesus called us to be peacemakers. I mean, there is just nothing in the New Testament that allows me to understand the compulsion that Christ gives to my life or the Holy Spirit puts on me as a believer more important than me being a peacemaker. And I mean reconciling people to God and to each other in every way, being a peacemaker. The fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of those who make peace has become one of my most oft-quoted verses. That calling for us would compel me to take this avenue anyway, to say, let's break down the wall and figure out how we can connect with people on the other side of the divide and realize that Christ died for them as well as for us, and that he's inviting them to a transformation as well as us, and that he in his sovereign power has put us in a culture with them, not just given us weapons to destroy them, but given us lives in relationship with them living next door to us. There's got to be more to it. So as an idealist, I would be saying, let's figure out how we can build a bridge over this wall, or a pathway through this wall, or figure out somehow to do something other than just be belligerent all the time. But I'm not making the argument as an idealist. I'm making it as a realist. As a realist, I know how systems and structures work. And I know that when Roe is gone, all of the advocates for the pro-abortion issue are still going to be there. And the systems and structures that enforced that idea in American society are still going to be there. And the structures and systems that created this entrenched warfare between the two sides are still going to be there. And because of that, I know that the protections for prenatal life and for all human life are not going to be any greater now than they were before this overthrow of Roe, in terms of the next court ruling and the next election and the next cycle of debates and arguments and the next PR debacle that will come up and so on. And so I want us to provide something better than just the use of law and force for winning this conversation right now. Unless we infuse the whole culture with the possibility, and really with more than possibility, with the evidence that respect for women can thrive in a society that also prohibits abortion. And see, that's not just saying that part of the sentence excludes the pro-choice side from listening to the rest of what I'm going to say. And I'm not saying that in an insulting way to the other side. It is so built into the structure of our society's arguments about the pro-life and pro-choice issue. It's so built into this society that respect for women and prohibition of abortion go hand in hand that we can't consider the possibility that we can offer, as a pro-life people, that we can offer a society in which there actually is a respect for women thriving in a society where abortion is prohibited, unless we can provide our entire culture, not just the part that wants the rulings to go this way, but our entire culture with the possibility and evidence that a respect for women can thrive in a society also prohibiting abortion. Then the change that we're receiving, which would only be secured in law by the use of force, and I am happy for that change in law, but that security that we've embraced for prenatal life in that context would be tenuous at best. Every election could overturn it. So this is my plea for us in the beginning of the conversation, just to recognize that we need to hope for more. The idea of overturning Roe has been, from the beginning of this process of the culture war in my life, has been the Holy Grail. That's been everything. As if we, and when I say that, I do mean when people talk about a Holy Grail, they mean there is nothing else to obtain. You have obtained the thing that you were going for. The fact that Roe v. Wade was the Holy Grail for the pro-life movement makes a lot of people back up from this and go, we won, split flat, we're done. It's all good. There's nothing else to be done. And that's not just a mistake. It's not just a tactical mistake. It's a revelation of the mistake in thinking that we were already committing ourselves to the war between the sides, instead of actually trying to ensconce the value of human life in our society, instead of just the forced protection of that human life. Again, I'm for even using force to protect the value of human life. I'm not against that, but it's not enough to get where we want to go. And that's what I'm trying to invite. So I want, I'll say it this way. All of those other people, all of those other decision-making processes, all of those other factors that were present when a person decided over the last 50 years that the best decision for them was to end the life that was unexpectedly growing within them, instead of adopting or having and raising the child. All of the influences that caused a person to decide that, all of those factors still exist in our society when Roe is gone, except for Roe. That's the only thing that's gone. Everything else that would have caused them to make that decision is still present. Those things did not disappear. And neither will the most significant part of this challenge, which is that attitude. They are those attitudes. Those attitudes are what shape public policy and private decisions. The attitudes that say it's not fair for a woman in a career to have to deal with things that men don't have to deal with because they don't get pregnant. Those attitudes, which are understandable. I understand those statements. Those attitudes are still going to exist. And nothing. So the fact that I want every person in our society to respect life in the womb in the same way they respect life outside of the womb. That's what I want. And I'll talk more about that understanding of how to define this issue in next episodes where we're talking about this topic. But that fact that I want life to be respected in that way doesn't address any of the other issues that have made people adopt a pro-choice stance. Obviously that issue is central to what we're talking about in the pro-life, pro-choice argument from the pro-life side. But it's not necessarily central to what people in the pro-life, pro-choice debate are talking about from the pro-choice side, or even why they hold their position. And the challenges of changing those attitudes are enormous, but they are what we ought to be thinking about if we want to create an environment in our culture that sustainably values and protects human life even in the womb. That's what I want us to start addressing. And so in this first part of the discussion, I'm just introducing the concepts that we need to talk about, recognizing that among the options that are before us are these two primarily: continuing the culture war and just trying to win it outright so the other side basically ceases to exist or they all repent of their opinion. Or we start figuring out how to have a conversation, a peacemaking conversation, where we can actually win over the other side, not to agree with us on everything in human life, but to agree with us that it is possible for us to protect and value human life in the womb and yet care about the things that they care about beyond abortion itself, the issues that have driven that side of our society to equate respect for women with abortion. We can see something beyond that. And if we see something beyond that, then we can get ground where something beyond the force of law underlies the protection that we provide for human lives that are in the womb. And that's what I desire. Of course, I would still want those lives to be protected by the force of law, but we can only maintain that protection if we get to a position where we can actually value those lives that are in the womb as a society. And that's what I want to make an argument for us just to start making progress toward as we continue this conversation about what it could be like to live in the world post-Roe.
Thanks for joining us for Coffee with Creamer. Your cup of coffee may be finished, but we are not. Come back next week for a refill as we sit down to examine a new set of ideas and cultural issues. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or visit our website at barrycreamer.com. Until next time, keep your mug hot and your mind sharp.